And kicking off the main card, we have Jimmy Crute versus Alonzo Menifield, and Crute's the minus 225 favorite. Menifield's the plus 190 underdog, and this is a pretty interesting matchup, potentially very violent one as well. Stylistic matchup that I feel like would lead to a finish, combined with the fact that both guys are pretty good finishers in their own right. So Crute, he is making his return after having his face broken by now the reigning champ, Jamal Hill. And if I remember correctly, I think Crute was a slight or moderate favorite in that matchup, which is pretty interesting in hindsight. Overall, it does seem like the market has somewhat overvalued Crute throughout his career, and I feel like that does seem to happen when you have a very aggressive grappler win very dominantly, so not too surprising there. But with Crute, obviously he is a pretty good wrestler. He's able to, at least on paper, convert a lot of his takedowns, but it is worth noting that a lot of the guys that Crute has taken down are guys with pretty poor takedown defense. Guys like Anthony Smith, who, historically has had pretty poor takedown defense, and even guys like Oleg Chaychuk, who pretty bad takedown defense on top of the fact that Oleg Chaychuk's a pretty small light heavyweight as well. And outside of both of those performances, we actually haven't really seen Crute, aggressively hit takedowns, or at least, be able to put multiple takedowns together. He actually does have a number of wins where he's knocking guys out on the feet. He does seem to have some power standing. I wouldn't say he's a very technical striker by any means, but he does have a pretty nasty overhand, and he does seem to be able to generate a bit of power on the feet. And on the mat, if he is able to get on top of you, he does have some pretty nice ground and pound. He'll look to very aggressively attack the submissions. And in fact, he's actually been able to find a finish in all of his wins. Has been finished in all of his losses as well, so Crute, someone who will actually go out there and look to push the action. Sometimes he does put himself on the line there, but he is a pretty potent finisher as well. But overall, I still do have some questions in terms of how he's going to look late, since he's really only had one fight go past the first round, at least at the UFC level. And Menifield, on the other hand, we've definitely seen him fade later in fights. I think it's pretty safe to say that the cardio from Menifield's no good, and it's not really that surprising. The guy does carry a lot of muscle. He does swing pretty hard early on. He does use a lot of very big movements in his striking, so that is something that is pretty taxing on the cardio, but when he does connect, it is pretty devastating. Even when it doesn't fully connect, he's able to do some pretty serious damage, even if his opponents are able to kind of, block some of the shots. He's got some pretty nasty low leg kicks as well. I think we'll try to use that on Crute, but overall, I just don't think that Menifield is really that good or skilled of a fighter. He's got dynamite in his hands, but that's really about it. I don't think he's particularly technical standing. And I don't think he's got a ton of grappling upside. I actually don't think his grappling is really that good either. He has shown pretty good takedown defense, but I feel if you can take him down, put him on his back, and flatten him out, I think he'll really struggle there. And I do think that's actually what's going to happen here. Obviously Menifield is pretty live for the knockout early, when he's fresh, when he still has, a lot left in the tank. But ultimately, I feel if Crute is able to be persistent with his takedown attempts, I do see this fight eventually hitting the ground. And overall, I just think that there's a much bigger gap on the mat than there is on the feet. Crute striking obviously isn't that good, but honestly, neither is Menifield's. Menifield's got big power, but I really don't think he sets him up all that well. It seems to kind of just wing bombs in there and kind of just brute forces a lot of his knockouts. But there were a couple of fights from Menifield where he did kind of slow down the pace a little bit, fight a little more conservatively, and wasn't, just going too crazy. And I actually feel like that might be a better option for him here, because I feel like if he's just swinging big hooks here, or just is getting sloppy with his combinations, I think Crute is going to be able to time a level change and hit a takedown on Menifield. And that is actually how I see Crute getting it done here. I think we eventually see Menifield just overextend on a combination, and Crute is able to time a level change and hit a takedown. And from there, I think we see Crute get to work. He will have a pretty big advantage on the mat. I think he's going to be laying the ground and pound, look to open Menifield up a bit on the mat. And Menifield, I do think is going to, he's going to make mistakes. He's going to panic a little bit, and I do think that Crute is eventually going to be able to find the submission on Menifield here. So, official pick for this fight, I am going to go with Jimmy Crute to win by round 1 submission. But this is a fight that I kind of actually like the unders a little bit more. Obviously, we have Menifield just big knockout threat, and then, I do think that if Crute is able to hit takedowns, he's probably pretty alive for the submission as well. So, official pick, I will go with Crute to win by round 1 submission, but I do like someone to get finished in this fight. And up next, we have our patented low-level heavyweight bout between Justin Tafa and Parker Porter. Tafa is the minus 140 favorite, and Porter is the plus 120 underdog. And we'll start with Tafa, who honestly is a guy I've just never really been that high on. I really don't think he's all that good. He's a pretty one-dimensional striker. I believe he made his UFC debut as, I think, 2-0 or 3-0 fighter. Got put on the Izzy Whittaker card in Australia as one of the local fighters. Ends up getting knocked out by Yorgan De Castro, of all people, and proceeds to go 2-3 at the UFC level, just against some very, very low-level guys, some of the worst guys in the division. His wins are over Juan Adams and Harry Hunsucker, a couple of guys who are no longer with the promotion, and his losses are to Yorgan De Castro, Carlos Felipe, and Jared Vandera, a few guys who are also no longer with the promotion. So, this guy's sub 500 against just bottom of the barrel guys at heavyweight. So just not a very good look whatsoever. I have some serious doubts as to whether or not he's really even UFC caliber. Probably not, but the heavyweight division is pretty shallow. And, it is worth noting with Tafa, he is still pretty young in his career and pretty young in general. So there is a chance he's making some pretty big improvements, over this past year and a half. His opponent, Porter, on the other hand, is definitely a much more completed product. And overall, I do think he's definitely got a lot more depth to his game, a lot more wrinkles as well. With Porter, he is a pretty high-paced volume striker, someone who can kind of just mix up the striking on all three levels. He can push or pace for all 3 rounds as well. He's shown he can mix in the wrestling. So Porter, he's pretty well-rounded, pretty versatile, but he does also take a lot of damage. His high volume and output style does leave a lot of openings for opponents to land strikes on him. And I actually don't think that Porter has the best chin. He did take a lot of damage from guys. He has gone the distance in a number of fights, but guys like Badeau and Parisian and Chase Sherman, really just not the most devastating strikers. But honestly, I don't know if Tafa is either. I do think Tafa is probably going to be the heavy hitter between the two, but I don't know if that's enough for him to either hurt Porter badly or enough to land a knockdown or knockout in this fight. So kind of a tough fight here. I think it's pretty 50-50 unless Porter gets knocked out, which, it can't happen here. I feel like the strength and the power of Tafa is still a bit of a question mark. He does have a couple knockout wins, but against very low-level guys. We have seen Porter get chinned in there before. But assuming Porter just doesn't get hurt too badly here, I think it's going to be a pretty back-and-forth sort of fight. Like, if you just watch some of the fights that these guys have been in that have gone the distance, they are relatively competitive. I do think that some of the wins are pretty clear-cut, but, it's not like they're completely blowing their opponents out of the water here. And I feel like with how they match up, we are going to see some, pretty back-and-forth exchanges here. But overall, I do have to side with the slightly more experienced fighter in Porter. He is getting a bit older, but overall, I do think he's a little more skilled and a bit more well-rounded, and is actually the same size as Tafa. Going into this matchup, I actually thought that Porter would be a little smaller, but as it turns out, he's actually a bit longer, actually, in terms of the measurables. So I'm going to lean Porter in this spot. I think he's going to be able to land just a little bit more, especially down the stretch. I think he may even be live for takedowns as well. I don't think the bottom game of Tafa has really been tested before, and at 5-3, I can imagine it's probably not that great. I know he does have a 100% takedown rate, but I don't think he's really fought anyone who's been able to really mix it up. Porter, not a fantastic wrestler by any means, but we have seen him go to it. And if he is having success there in this fight, I do think that Porter is a savvy enough veteran that he'll look to start to abuse it a bit. So I'm going to go with Porter in this fight. I'll take Porter to win by pretty competitive decision. I see him eventually just being able to pull away a bit in terms of the volume later in the fight, and maybe be able to even mix in some of the takedowns to secure some control time and win minutes. So give me Porter to win by decision. And next up we have Della Maddalena versus Randy Brown, and Maddalena's the minus 300 favorite. Brown is the plus 250 underdog, and this is a very good fight in my opinion. The fight that I'm actually looking forward to the most outside of the main event. Should be a banger, should be a very fun striking affair. We have Maddalena coming in on a pretty nice streak, riding a bit of hype against Brown, who is a very slick striker in his own right, and a very established UFC fighter. One that will definitely give Maddalena a very good test here. But we'll start with Maddalena first. So with Maddalena, he is primarily a boxer, lots of pressure, very aggressive. Very heavy-handed. He does very good work in the pocket, and he is actually pretty good defensively as well. And, he's up against Brown, who is a very long-rangey striker, uses his length pretty well, pretty good head movement, very good footwork and distance management as well, very flowy on the feet. But the issue with Brown and the style that he has is he can be pretty showboaty in there. He fights very loose and has eaten shots as a result, and is definitely paid for it in fights before. And with how much he likes to use his head movement, I feel like fighters are eventually gonna, they're gonna catch on a bit. They're gonna be a little hip to it, and I think they're gonna look to just sprinkle in some of those knees, or even just look to double up on the same side and maybe catch Brown dipping into a strike, which can be, very devastating, pretty much a guaranteed knockout. So Brown, he is pretty slick defensively, has, decent vision, but I feel like it could end very, very badly for him. We've seen Brown sometimes be able to recover from it and tighten up his defense, but I feel like sometimes he's just playing with fire a little too much there, gets a little too loose, and, you can't keep getting away with it every single fight. And the other issue that I do have with Brown is he is very prone to leg kicks. He's got some of the longest legs in the division. He's very reliant on his mobility, and he doesn't react particularly well to his legs getting kicked either. The only issue is in this matchup, I haven't really seen Maddalena throw kicks. Maddalena, he is more of a boxer, and, he does actually fight out of a pretty wide boxing stance, so he's kind of prone to leg kicks himself. I have seen Maddalena, occasionally, throw kicks to the body, but most of the times he's just looking to throw hands in there. But honestly, I feel like if he's really done any sort of research or prep work for this fight, he really should be looking to drill the leg kicks this fight. We've seen Brown really struggle with those. We've seen Brown look pretty uncomfortable in there when the damage from the kicks start to accumulate. But overall, it is a pretty interesting dynamic just because we haven't really seen Maddalena go to it aggressively. And Brown, at this point, he has definitely adjusted to it a bit in his game. He's faced a number of good leg kickers, actually, in his career. So against Maddalena, a guy who doesn't really throw him too much, it'll be a very interesting dynamic. We'll be very interested to see if Maddalena is able to have success there. But stylistically, I do think that this is a somewhat favorable matchup for Maddalena. And the reason I say that is even though Brown, he is much taller and longer, Brown does tend to struggle a bit against guys who can pressure him, guys who are able to get in his face and just force exchanges in the pocket. And in the pocket, I do favor the hand speed of Maddalena. I do think that he's got maybe a little more raw power there. I think he's going to be capable of landing the much heavier shots, whereas with Brown, he's a bit more of a sniper at distance. Someone who's going to like to use the kicks to maintain distance. But I feel that if Maddalena is able to kind of just bite down and look to just really be aggressive in exchange with Brown. I think he could maybe just land something big in the pocket. I don't think Brown's got the best durability either. Honestly, I kind of see this fight being somewhat similar in dynamic to the Bobby Green Drew Dober fight, where Brown is going to be the much slicker fighter on the feet. But he does also like to fight pretty, and I feel like if Maddalena is able to go out there and make it a dogfight, I feel like he's going to be able to land just some of the heavier shots down the stretch. So stylistically, I think if Maddalena is able to kind of force the issue, I think he will be able to land some big shots. And I also think that it'll come down to if Brown is going to be able to get the respect of Maddalena, kind of get him off him, and not let him, just pressure him the whole fight. But honestly, this is a pretty tricky fight in that while stylistically, I think that Maddalena, should have some advantages here. This could just be a complete levels fight. Jack, he does look pretty good so far. He's on a nice little finish streak here. He's got a couple of first-round finishes against veterans. So very impressive. But, those guys are kind of just fringe UFC-level gatekeepers in Robertson, Meave. I feel like this is a very very big step up in competition. Randy Brown, I think a perennial top 15 guy. So I think a pretty big level difference there. So without a doubt, the best striker that Maddalena has gone up against. And I think there's a very real scenario here that we see Brown kind of just finesse Maddalena in the spot. Just stay on the outside and look to just touch him up and avoid some of the power shots. But I actually am going to go the other way here. I'm leaning Maddalena. I think the pressure and the power will eventually get to Brown. But where the line is at now, at minus 300, I feel like the value is probably on the Brown side. Stylistically, obviously I could see Maddalena giving Brown a lot of trouble, but we're making a lot of assumptions here. What if Maddalena just isn't a really effective leg kicker? It doesn't really translate in this matchup. Just what if Maddalena isn't able to really track down Brown in this fight? There's a chance that Brown could just look like a massive favorite here, right? If he's able to avoid a lot of the power shots, he's able to kind of skirt around the octagon, is able to kind of just piece up Maddalena. Kind of similar to the Jared Gooden fight. It could be a very lopsided affair. But on the other hand, with someone like Brown, who is prone to kind of just slipping up in there, it could end up being a bit like the Chaos Williams fight where, he's looking pretty good until Williams is able to land something big and, swing the round in his favor, which is definitely a possibility in this fight. But ultimately, I am going to lean the Maddalena side. I think we see him pick up a round 2 knockout. But at minus 300, I feel like it is a little disrespectful to Brown, who is a pretty proven UFC level fighter. But official pick, I'll go with Maddalena to win by round 2 knockout. And next up in the co-main event, we have Yair Rodriguez versus Josh Emmett. Rodriguez is the minus 150 favorite. Emmett is the plus 135 underdog. And this is a very good matchup here. Very good fight in the featherweight division. Good to see some movement in the division, and really good to see Rodriguez active again after taking a couple years off, because Rodriguez, in my opinion, a very fun fighter to watch. Very dynamic on the feet. A guy who can strike out of both stances. Does some really good attritional work with the body kicks. He's going to look to mix in some of the crazy spinning attacks once in a while. Throw really crafty elbows and knees. And on top of that, he's got the cardio and durability to back up that wild style that he has. The one big hole in his game, though, has got to be his takedown defense, something that I feel like has been exploited before. He's given up takedowns in most of his fights, and, it's to guys who aren't really even known for their wrestling either. And Emmett, is a pretty capable wrestler himself. The only issue is he's not really looking to wrestle much these days. He's got immense power in his hands, and I feel like he's kind of just leaned into that in a lot of his recent fights. But yeah, he does have dynamite in his hands, and as we saw in his last fight, even when he is getting out-volumed, he's able to kind of steal a decision by being able to land some of the heavier shots. Not to say, I completely agree with the decision, but I did think that Emmett made a decent case for himself in that fight. And another thing to note with the power is it does act as a bit of a deterrent. Even though Rodriguez has a little more volume, or at least he should have the volume advantage, there's a chance that maybe some of that volume is suppressed because Rodriguez is maybe a little wary of the power coming his way. We saw with Cater, the guy's very tough, but he felt some of the power of Emmett and was a little hesitant to engage later in the fight. But as the fight went on, though, we did see, Cater start to pick it up a little more. But early on, it did look like the power was getting to him and was making him a bit hesitant to really let his hands go. And that is something that could potentially happen again in this fight. Even though Rodriguez, he has shown really good, heart and durability, it's going to be a little different when, you have a guy like Emmett just landing bombs on you because, Rodriguez, he's fought some pretty good guys in there, some pretty heavy hitters, but I do think that Emmett's probably going to be, the heaviest and most explosive hitter that Rodriguez has faced to date. That said, I feel like the 5-round nature of this is going to favor Rodriguez a bit more, especially down the stretch. I just feel that, early on, Rodriguez, he's going to feel the power of Emmett, and I think if he's able to survive, he's going to be very confident in his ability to be able to eat these shots and be able to continue to move forward and throw the volume like he usually does. And between the two, I kind of favor Rodriguez a little more in terms of the cardio. And on top of that, Rodriguez has actually had quite a bit more. Well, not quite a bit more, but he has had a bit more 5-round experience. He's gone 5 rounds with Caceres, actually, back in the day. He went 5 rounds with the Korean Zombie and Max Holloway, and was scheduled for a 5-rounder against Ortega as well. So he's probably going to be a little more comfortable, going into this, having all those training camps behind him. And between the two, I just think that Rodriguez is more suited to 5 rounds than Emmett. And ultimately, I kind of see this playing out somewhat similarly to the Cater Emmett fight. Emmett, he's going to look, he's going to look good early. He's going to land some big shots, but I feel like as the fight starts to drag on, we start to see Rodriguez start to pick it up a little bit more. I think if Rodriguez is able to get through some of the early power from Emmett, we see him start to be able to pour it on later. I think Emmett's going to start to slow down a little bit. Emmett also getting a little up there in age at 37, and if he does start to slow down the stretch, I can see him getting maybe a little sloppy and getting caught in one of the weird dynamic strikes of Rodriguez. And I don't think that Emmett's got a bad chin by any means, but he is starting to get to that age where I think the cracks are starting to show a little bit more. I feel like he isn't reacting quite as well to some of the shots he's eating recently as he was back in the day. And the truth is he has taken a ton of damage over his last few fights. Was in a 5-round war against Cater. Took a decent bit of damage from Dan Ige, and then the Shane Burgos fight was an absolute war as well. So the damage could very well be adding up and catching up to him at this stage in his career. And Rodriguez, he is a very dangerous, very dynamic striker. So I think down the stretch, Emmett could potentially be in a bit of trouble. But official pick for this fight, I am going to go with Rodriguez. I am going to go with the younger guy, the more dynamic fighter, the guy who I think is maybe a little more well-suited to go 5 rounds. So official pick, I'll go with Rodriguez to pick up a round 4 knockout. And in the main event, we have Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski. Very, very interesting fight here. Makhachev's going to be the minus 400 favorite. Volkanovski's going to be the plus 300 underdog. But just 2 very, very high-level guys going at it. Obviously, 2 championship caliber fighters. Makhachev 23-1, Volkanovski 25-1. 2 of the pound-for-pound best fighters, on the roster going at it. Volkanovski going to be the guy moving up, so he'll be the challenger here. Makhachev, the one with his belt on the line. Very, very interesting dynamic, and one that I feel like is actually somewhat straightforward. On the Makhachev side, I think we all know what his win condition is. I think the most obvious and clear path for him is to go to the wrestling and grappling. He's going to be the much bigger guy, much more physical in there. And of course, Makhachev does have, an elite wrestling background. lifelong training partner of Khabib. So he'll definitely have to leverage that, I think, and take advantage of a much smaller Volkanovski. So I think it's pretty clear here for Makhachev to win. He'll have to secure takedowns, rack up control time, and look to do damage, win minutes that way, and maybe even find a finish. But, I will say this about Volk. He's a very tough guy, very hard to hold down and control. So, it's not going to be very easy for him to find a finish unless there's just a massive, massive physicality difference between the two. But as it stands, I do think that the path for Makhachev is pretty clear here, and he is pretty heavily favored to pull it off. So I don't completely disagree with where the line's at, but I'll just kind of make an argument for the other side here. Volkanovski, a very skilled, very technical fighter in his own right, and one that should definitely not be slept on here. So let's kind of talk about Volkanovski a little bit here. So for Volkanovski to win, I think he's going to have to do a number of things right, in my opinion. So how he does it, I think he's going to have to leverage his best attributes, and that's got to be his speed, his cardio, his footwork, distance management, and output. And these are all things he's definitely mixed together before to win fights, but he's going to have to do it here at a very high level to win against Makhachev. So I think for Volkanovski to win, he's going to have to really get on his bike, really try and stay at distance and look to just pick at Makhachev, use his footwork and feints to try to keep it standing as long as possible. But I think it's inevitable that we see Makhachev eventually get his hands on Volk. And when that happens, I think Volk, he's going to have to try and stay really calm in there, stay defensive, but he'll still have to make Makhachev work, right? He can't just accept being on bottom and let Makhachev kind of just rest on top of him and ride out the round and, just rack up control time for that round. Volkanovski's going to really have to make Makhachev exert himself in there and hopefully maybe turn this into a bit of an attritional sort of fight where it may come down to who's the fresher guy down the stretch, which potentially could get interesting. We know for sure Volkanovski's got elite cardio and conditioning, and he's able to push a phenomenal pace in there. And he's just a very tough, gritty guy who's shown he could just really dig deep in fights. Makhachev, on the other hand, slightly less proven down the stretch. He's been able to kind of just cut through his opponents recently. Now, don't get it mistaken here. I'm not saying that Makhachev has bad cardio or anything. In fact, I actually think Makhachev's got pretty damn good cardio. What I'm trying to say here is, if Volkanovski is able to be elusive and slippery in there, and be a lot harder than Makhachev expects to hold down, then, it could get interesting. But, I'm kind of just playing devil's advocate here. I do eventually think that Makhachev is going to be able to hit takedowns, and I just think that the physicality and the strength difference and the size difference is going to be a massive factor here. I just don't think that the speed and the cardio advantage that Volkanovski may have is going to be enough to really offset the physicality and the size that Makhachev is going to bring to the table here. And on top of that, it's not just size and physicality that Makhachev is bringing. He's got an elite wrestling base. He's got a very smothering top presence. Getting taken down and held down by a guy like Makhachev is going to be much, much different from guys like Mendes and even Darren Elkins. So overall, I just think that the path to victory for Makhachev is way more clear, and I think a lot more accessible to him, because another issue that I kind of have with Volk in this matchup is that he's just not really much of a finishing threat. I don't think he's got a Hail Mary submission that he could pull out of the bag. He's not like a very slick submission grappler. He showed really good submission defense against Ortega, but Volkanovski, not a guy who's going to look to, pull off a guard sub or anything. I don't think he's got a ton of power either. He's landed some big shots down at featherweight, but hasn't really been able to put away any of the top guys. I don't know if any of that power is really going to translate to lightweight here. So I find it kind of unlikely that Volk is able to find a finish. I don't think he's pulling off the submission. I think it's unlikely he's getting a freak knockout, which means he's going to have to somehow win a decision against Makhachev. I don't know how he's going to pull off, winning 3 of the 5 rounds against Makhachev here. I feel like the cardio of Makhachev should be good enough for him to at least rack up 3 rounds of control time and win, I'd say pretty clearly in that regard. And if it turns out that Makhachev maybe is just a little too big, a little too strong, I see him kind of maybe just pull away later in the fight, maybe even find the finish. Because even though I've said that Volkanovski's got elite cardio, it's going to be much different down the stretch when you have a much bigger guy just wailing on you. You're going to use up a lot more energy defending the ground and pound attempts, the takedowns, the smothering top control, and the submission attempts. So, if Volkanovski starts to get a bit fatigued, defending against a much bigger guy, there is a chance that maybe he does get finished down the stretch. But I'm going to trust his grittiness and his pride to pull through here, and I think he is going to be able to survive. So I'm going to go with Makhachev. I just have a hard time really seeing Volk keep it standing long enough to win, 3 of the 5 rounds here. So I'm going to go with Makhachev here to pull off, I'd say, a pretty decisive win. I think he wins, I'd say, a pretty clear 49-46 decision here. I think he's going to be able to rack up control time and hit takedowns in these rounds and win a pretty clear decision. So, give me Makhachev. Give me Makhachev to win by decision.